So thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. Today we'll be talking about the New South Wales building reform and the introduction of AS1851 becoming mandatory in New South Wales. This is a joint presentation on behalf of AMCA Australia, ERA and FPA Australia. I'd like to just make a quick note that this is a little bit focused toward HVAC practitioners. So whilst most of this information will still be relevant, there will be some particulars with regard to course information and mandatory units of competency, which are a little bit more targeted toward mechanical practitioners. So if you are from a fire background, they might not be 100% relevant, but there are resources out there available. I'll start with a quick acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the lands on which we all meet today, acknowledging that this is a virtual meeting, so there will be different nations for the lands on which you're currently presented. In terms of agenda today, so we'll start with a bit of a run through the FPAS scheme, a little bit of the history in that space, and then moving into what is happening in the New South Wales building reform and the impacts to the FPAS scheme. Then we'll talk to mandatory compliance with AS1851 becoming compulsory from next year. We'll then move to our panel discussion, where I'm joined with a panel of experts today. I have Simon Rickard, who is the National Technical Manager for the Fire Protection Association. I have Stacey Fine, who is the National Accreditation Manager at the FPA. I'm also joined by Ivan Steed, who is the Team Leader in Essential Services at Grosvenor Engineering Group, and also here representing ERA. I also have Brett Fairweather, who is a Mechanical Engineering Consultant at It's Engineered, also today here representing ERA. So getting into it. So a little bit of a history of FPAS. The FPAS accreditation. The scheme was launched in 2013 by FPA Australia. In 2017, the New South Wales government recognised FPAS as an approved accreditation scheme, integrating it into the regulatory framework. In 2018, the transitional accreditation practitioner pathway was introduced, which allowed for a little bit more time for practitioners to become fully accredited and more time for their training to be undertaken. By 2020, it became mandatory for fire safety practitioners to be fully accredited under the FPAS scheme or equivalent. There are two primary accreditation types currently within FPAS, the transitional and fully accredited pathway. Transitionally accredited practitioners have been granted temporary accreditation based on their experience, but are still required to undergo the full accreditation within the specified timeframes, with full accredited practitioners having completed all required training and units of competence and assessment, demonstrating their competency in the framework. Significant changes are underway in accreditation requirements. All transitionally accredited practitioners must obtain full accreditation by completing the specified units of competency. Originally, practitioners were required to meet their qualification requirements within 4 years of receiving transitional accreditation. This set the deadlines between the 31st of July 2024 and the 30th of June 2025, depending on when their transitional accreditation was granted. A 1-year extension has been granted based on the ongoing New South Wales building reform process. This adjustment provides practitioners with 5 years to achieve their qualifications. The new deadlines are now pushed to fall between the 31st of July 2025 and the 30th of June 2026. It's important for all practitioners to check their transitional deadlines and take proactive steps to complete their qualification courses to ensure they do not risk any backlogs or delays in course capacities, with a significant number of applicants expected to start the process early in the new year. To achieve full accreditation under the FPAS, practitioners must complete specific units and competencies that I have listed here on the screen. These are, as I mentioned, HVAC specific, so you should check on the FPA website and the FPAS website for the relevant stream to make sure that you are completing the necessary courses. Typically, there are courses for Cert 2, Cert 3 and diploma level, all with varying differences in what you are able to work on once completing your accreditation scheme. These units of competencies are run through various training providers, including the AMCA and the FPA. So for more information on these courses, please do refer to the AMCA and the FPA website so that you know exactly what courses you are required to get your full accreditation. So as mentioned, there's quite a bit of change happening in this space. The New South Wales government is implementing significant reforms in the building industry, specifically targeting fire safety and the roles of building services practitioners. A key aspect of this reform is the transition to a government licensing scheme. Under the new building bill, licenses will be issued by the Building Commission of New South Wales, bringing building services contractors in line with other licensed practitioners in the construction industry. For those who are fully accredited under FPAS, this means you'll transition to a new license class. The transition period is yet to be confirmed, but New South Wales Government have made it clear that fully accredited practitioners will be recognised where they align with the new requirements. However, transitionally accredited practitioners will need to upskill to meet the new licence requirements. The government acknowledges that additional training may be necessary, so it's important to be proactive over the next 12 to 18 months in either completing the current scheme or keeping informed on the New South Wales changes as more information becomes available. Remaining active in engagement with your associations, as well as continuing to keep you informed as more information becomes available. Another significant change in the implementation of continued professional development, CPD. CPD will become mandatory for license renewal, emphasising the importance of ongoing learning and maintaining high competency standards in our industry. Additionally, there are proposed changes to prerequisite courses for trade licenses with the introduction of new license classes. These classes are mechanical services plumbing, refrigeration and air conditioning, and mechanical services ducting. These new license classes are designed to better reflect the specialised work being performed and ensure there are appropriate qualifications and competencies. Units of competency like the UEERA 98 unit, inspect, test and repair of smoke control features of mechanical service systems, have already been indicated by the government as becoming a mandatory unit under the refrigeration licence moving forward. This we see as being a big change in what will likely be new accreditation units under the government's fire scheme. Hence why it's incredibly important to keep up to date on the information or get ahead in your process of becoming fully accredited rather than transitional, as current units that may be listed on there may become mandatory under the new license class and impact the future scheme. Moving along now, and the mandatory of compliance of AS1851. On the 13th of February in 2025, AS1851 2012 will become mandatory for all buildings in New South Wales requiring an annual or supplementary fire safety statement. This marks a significant shift in regulatory requirements, and it's essential for us to understand the implications for mechanical safety systems and maintenance. So things to consider. AS1851 is currently undergoing an update. The New South Wales Government has specified that compliance must be with the 2012 edition of 1851. This means that despite any newer versions and when they are released, adherence to the 2012 edition is what is required by the New South Wales Government. This may become important contractually if your clients call for more up-to-date versions, so it's important to stay abreast of both your contractual obligations and the New South Wales Government requirements. Some other things to consider. The New South Wales Public Health Relations call for compliance with AS3666 2011. AS3666.2 specifically requires that air handling systems be inspected and maintained in accordance with AS1851. So there is already a degree of requirement for air handling systems to have been maintained in accordance with 1851. The interplay between these standards means that historically, compliance with 1851 2012 has implications under the public health regulations. And so there needs to be further discussion with your clients around what you have currently been doing and what future obligations under 1851 will be required for yourselves. Penalties for non-compliance. Failure to comply with these requirements can result in substantial penalties. Fines of up to $66,000 for corporations and fines for $33,000 for individuals can be handed down. These penalties highlight the seriousness with which New South Wales Government regards the compliance. Non-compliance not only poses safety risks, but also exposes businesses and individuals to financial liabilities. And it should be noted that multiple penalty fines can be issued to single persons or corporations for multiple breaches. So what does this really mean with 1851 becoming compliant? So we take a look at the scope of AS1851. Its significance is on routine servicing of the safety systems. It's important to understand that AS1851 focuses on the systems after they have been commissioned. This means that the standard outlines the procedures and requirements for ongoing maintenance activities to ensure that fire safety systems continue to operate effectively throughout their service life. It does not cover the initial commissioning of the system or the issuance of annual compliance statements like the annual fire safety statements. One of the key aspects of AS1851 is the emphasis on access to records. The standard mandates that hard copies of maintenance records must be kept on site for the previous 7 years. This requirement serves as necessary for the building owners and operators to maintain these records when services practitioners provide them. Another critical component of AS1851 is the reporting requirements. For any defect or non-conformance identified during routine servicing, the standard specifies strict timeframes for reporting these issues to ensure they are addressed promptly. Critical defects should be reported within 24 hours. Critical defects are issues that could render the system inoperative or significantly impair its performance, posing an immediate risk to safety. Examples might include failed smoke control fan or a non-functioning fire damper. Prompt reporting allows for immediate corrective actions to mitigate risks. Reporting of non-critical defects should be undertaken within 1 week. Non-critical defects may pose an immediate threat, may not pose an immediate threat, but could affect system performance over time if left unaddressed. Examples could include minor leaks and wear and tear. Timely reporting, again, should be scheduled to make sure repairs can be undertaken. And non-conformances. Non-conformances should be reported within 1 week. Non-conformances refer to deviations from the prescribed maintenance procedures or standards outlined in AS1851. This could include missing baseline data or incomplete maintenance records. Communicating these requirements to all stakeholders involved in the maintenance process is crucial for several reasons. It ensures that everyone understands their roles and responsibilities within the scope of 1851, notably the responsibilities of you as the maintenance contractors and the responsibilities on the building owners and operators in getting defects rectified and provisioning of suitable records. So, baseline data. Understanding the expectations of baseline data is essential for compliance with 1851. Specifically, Clause 1.8, baseline data is required to verify the results of routine services activities and is limited to the information prescribed by the regulations, codes, or standards that apply to the system at its approved design point. When baseline data is unavailable, the routine service activities can be compared to baseline data and can record and report findings. However, when baseline data is unavailable, Clause 1.8 instructs us to carry out all routine servicing activities still and record the results. Importantly, reporting the unavailability of the baseline data as a non-conformance documented under H1. The absence of baseline data has significant implications for building certification. Ideally, a building should not have been certified or even occupied without the necessary baseline data in place. This situation underscores the responsibility of building owners and certifiers to ensure that all required documentation is available and maintained. Whilst we must continue maintenance activities diligently, we should clearly report any non-conformance due to missing baseline data. It's important to communicate to building owners that obtaining and providing this data is their responsibility, and our reporting helps highlight areas that need attention to ensure compliance and safety. As maintenance contractors operating under AS 1851, it's crucial for you to recognise that you are not responsible for reproducing or generating missing baseline data. Generating baseline data is beyond the scope of the standard maintenance activities. The primary obligation is to perform routine services tasks, record the results, and report any non-conformances, such as the absence of baseline data. However, proceeding without clear contractual limitations can expose you to additional risks and liabilities. Without specifying your responsibilities regarding missing baseline data, you might inadvertently assume liability for issues beyond your control. To mitigate these risks, it's advisable to include specific clauses in your contracts that define the extent of your obligations. One contractual recommendation is to include language such as maintenance services will be performed in accordance with AS 1851-2012, where baseline data is unavailable. The service provider will conduct maintenance to the extent practicable. This clause clearly states that while you commit to maintaining the system as per the code, your ability to verify and validate certain aspects may be limited due to the absence of baseline data. It reinforces the responsibility for providing baseline data to the building owner. If building owners require assistance in developing the missing baseline data, you can offer this as an additional service. This would involve being engaged under a separate contract or variation specifically for this purpose. It should be noted that establishing performance criteria and details relevant to the design of the existing system may require engineering and/or fire safety input. Maintenance contractors should not be expected to improvise in this area or take on or create any unnecessary risk. In developing the baseline data, you can reference standards at the time of the installation if the standard date is known, or use current standards if the installation date is unknown. It's important to emphasize that this process is not intended to upgrade the system to current standards, but to establish a reference point for maintenance purposes. By including clear contractual limitations and offering the option to develop baseline data separately, you protect yourself from undue liability while providing valuable service to your clients. This approach ensures that both parties are aware of their responsibilities and that maintenance work can proceed effectively when baseline data is initially missing. So what's next? Given the significant changes, here are some steps you should all take moving forward. Assess your current qualifications. Review the current FPAS accreditation and qualifications and determine how they align with the new licensing requirements. And be prepared for the transition. If you're a transitionally accredited FPAS practitioner, plan to upskill to meet the new license class requirements, or take advantage of the transitional arrangements that the New South Wales government have indicated and complete your process before the timeframes run out. Continue to engage with your association and regulatory bodies to make sure you're up to date and stay informed of all changes. Keeping informed of the building bill and upcoming licensing changes by again participating in consultations with the Building Commission, or by reaching out to your associated associations where they are asking for feedback or providing further updates. And ensure you're completing your required units competencies in a reasonable timeframe. For more information, please feel free to reach out to any of these resources within the AMCA, ERA, or the FPA on all elements of technical, training, and accreditation pathways. We'll now be moving to open up questions to our Q&A panel. So please ensure you're putting questions in the Q&A section so that we can ask these to our panel of experts. I'll ask my panel to come off mute and turn your screens on so that we can see each of our members, and we'll get the Q&A session started. So thank you all for joining me today. Stacey, I might start with you. Practitioners are facing significant changes in accreditation and licensing over the next 12 to 18 months. What challenges do you anticipate for these practitioners during this period, both transitional and fully accredited? And how can we best prepare them to navigate these changes to ensure a smooth transition?
I think a lot of that's on us, but just to clarify, 16 to 18 months, it could be more like 18 to 24 months. And I think a really important part of this is to remember that half of all FSA and FSD practitioners are required to be qualified by the end of July 2025. So that's just over 7 months away. And if you are not qualified and the new licensing won't be in by July. This legislation hasn't even passed yet. So if you're not qualified by the end of your transition period, you will lose your license. Your accreditation will be canceled, and you'll need to wait and reapply when the new licensing, when and if it does come in. So I think the best way people can prepare for this, practitioners can prepare, is to make sure they get qualified by their deadline. We will continue to advocate with the New South Wales government to ensure that there is an easy and smooth transition for those who've done the right thing and got qualified under FPAS, as FPAS was completed in conjunction with the New South Wales government and was approved by the New South Wales government. The New South Wales government has expressed that they are well aware that the fire industry is change fatigue and they're not looking to rewrite everything. So the best thing everyone can do is ensure that they get qualified to the current requirements.
Yeah, fantastic. Again, just reinstating and reinforcing that the next 12 months is critical to scheduling for your team members to undertake that training where relevant. Really be on the front foot, because you don't want to be caught sleeping. I might jump to you now, Brett, and understanding the differences and interactions between baseline data 1851 and the annual fire statements can sometimes be challenging in practical terms. Can you clarify how these items interact and their respective roles?
All right, thanks, Ben. I'll have a go at it. The way I explained it, actually, there was a slide we had earlier which had figure 1.7 out of AS1851. I think it was the 9th slide. You mind popping that up on the screen for
Absolutely.
talk about that? Made a note of that one. Yeah, that one there. Certainly in some of the training that I run on AS1851 and the like, I really highlight that the scope of the standard AS1851 is limited to the contents of the dashed box in that figure there. So prior to work in accordance with AS1851 commencing, the system's been designed, installed, and then commissioned, and the baseline data is available. And then the contents of the box occurs under AS1851, and then the annual compliance statement or the annual fire safety statement is then issued to the relevant authority or council or whoever it is. So other activities sit outside of that. So just trying to focus on that. So you can see that baseline data is outside the box and the AFSS or the annual compliance statements outside the box. But the way I look at this in simple terms, when I try and come up with a bit of an analogy, the testing for an AFSS is like doing the annual performance test on car's brake system. It works on the day or it doesn't. At the end of the brake test, some sort of bit of documentation is either given to the owner or uploaded to the relevant authority, and the owner can get on with using their car based on the fact that it's just been checked for being safe there. Whereas the routine services like changing the brake fluid or changing the brake pads or something, where whoever's carrying out the maintenance is following a set of instructions that's like AS1851 that tells us which brake fluid to use in the car and some of those sort of things. So we wouldn't go guessing at the dot rating of the brake fluid. That's not really going to be helping the customer. After that, we've then got the car's working out what the fluid might be or the brake pads might be. We go and refer to the manual that's sold with the car that tells us what the dot rating of the fluid would be, and that's like the baseline data. So the AFSS checks don't require the equivalent of, like for a brake test every year. Someone's not testing that the right fluid is in the car on the day for the performance test or that there's enough wear left on the brake pads. They're just carrying out the performance test on the day, which is quite different to then carrying out the maintenance that's required to make sure it's going to keep working until the next annual test. Probably a little more convoluted than I would have set out with, but hopefully there's a bit of an analogy there that helps.
No, I think that's a really good way to provide a bit of a visualization in the minds of how we should be moving forward with this. Just a reminder to everyone, if you can keep putting those questions through, we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible, and any we don't, we will follow up with an email with all questions and provide answers as best as possible. So again, I might open this up to the entire panel. So this one's from Ross. Where baseline data is not available, can it be derived from previous results for the purpose of comparison?
How would we know that those previous results were an acceptable level of performance? I guess if you can establish that, that might be one way of investigating the suitability of it.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary. If we might have previous results year on year, but what's to say that you're not already having fans that have derated over that time, and what are the age of those fans? When was everything installed? Previous results can be potentially an indication that the system hasn't degraded over that time period, but that still doesn't lend itself to full compliance with 1851. And again, you should be listing non-conformance in your reports as not having that original baseline data. Simon, I might open this one up to you. As maintenance routines ramp up, practitioners are likely to experience more compliance issues or uncover more issues. How can we prevent building owners from being blindsided by a sudden huge fix-it list?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think what's important was to get on the front foot and communicate from from the onset, and such communication can occur as of now, and endeavouring to make sure that they're aware, point to the sort of the 1851 and the requirement that there's the issue with as well, and it really is getting on the front foot. In some cases there'll be minor things to attend, but other times there'll be significant issues to attend to. And I know in the fire space that we are going to face the same issue, and we're just advising, get on the front foot, communicate and engage with the customer from the outset. It's all about the customer relationship in the first activity we'd suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think the key message here is that, often building services operators are looking to us as the experienced practitioners in the industry for our advice. So getting on the front foot and communicating with them early about what's changing, what that means for your routine servicing, what that means historically, and just being very clear and early in your communication is going to be the key to making sure we're not jumping any issues on them in the future and starting to have issues down the track. So again, I'll keep this open to the whole panel, so feel free to jump in. This is from Michael. If you have a client who does not engage you or your company for AS1851 mechanical items, but you are contracted to do the annual fire safety testing and sign off if found compliant, can a FSA sign off a building if no 1851 documentation is provided?
I think this comes back a little bit to like the brake test on the car. The mechanic testing the car doesn't necessarily need to see the logbook for the car to know that it performs on the day. I think we're testing a building for its performance to what's in the fire safety schedule on the day.
FPA Australia has always supported that the maintenance routine of AS1851 be followed, and nothing's changed. A lot of our assessments did include reference to AS1851, so we don't see this changing the role. If the accredited practitioner felt they can endorse the annual fire safety statement prior to the mandate of 1851, then they can continue to do it now that it's mandated.
Yeah, excellent. Hopefully that answers that one for you. Got one here from Chris Lee. I might direct this one to you, Simon, because I think it's a bit more fire related, but what happens to buildings with Ordinance 70 fire safety systems moving forward?
Right. So that does require, and Victorian based here, so sorry, Ben, in regards to the relevancy of the ordinance, but is that relates to whether it requires an AFSS? Does it require, in that example there, an AFSS?
So his question is just referring to Ordinance 70 fire safety systems. So I'd assume that there would still be.
In my experience, that would just mean, you're dealing with a system that perhaps, wasn't required to have baseline data prepared at the time. It's an older system. It's difficult to establish what it's supposed to be doing.
But I guess in accordance with 1851, it would still be required to be maintained in accordance with that standard.
Yeah, AS1851 doesn't. It's not specific to the standard. It's all based on the approved design, it calls it. So that allows us to try and establish what it was actually approved to.
Yep.
Excellent. So I've got one here from Sarah. If a client does not complete a routine service, for example, 5-yearly hydrant service that is due, is this measure not compliant and should not be signed off on an AFSS?
To the earlier point, to be honest, Ben, that and the person signing off the AFSS would need to determine if that's a performance concern. So that's the sort of, yeah.
That may be a non-conformance for the purpose of reporting under AS1851, which is a separate activity to the AFSS activities.
Yeah, so I think, again, it's good to just refer, I think I've still got that on screen with the diagram from 1851, where 1851 sits in that services space and it is slightly separate to the annual compliance statement. But again, these activities are there for a reason, to make sure that the system will continue to operate. So always reporting any defects or non-conformances that have been missed in terms of maintenancing or in terms of system performance, just to make sure that you're keeping compliant with the guidelines of 1851.
I think it's worth highlighting the purpose of that yearly condition report and identifying defects. These are for the benefit of the owner of the asset, who are not necessarily experts in the fire safety systems or the mechanical services, and they're relying on skilled practitioners to be able to bring those things to their attention so they can continue looking after the people who are using their asset. And we need to make sure they're aware of it, and AS1851 helps us in the process of identifying issues.
I can see, I believe, Rudolph, you have your hand up. We do have audio and video disabled for participants, so please put any questions you have just within the Q&A chat panel, and we'll try to get to those. So again, this might be a good one for Stacey and the whole panel. From Cameron, do the technicians carrying out the 1851 maintenance work have to be FPA certified or FPAS certified? I believe that's meant to be.
I wish I could say yes, but no. We do have a voluntary FPAS accreditation for inspect and test, but it is not mandated in New South Wales. So to do AS1851, you do not have to have an FPAS accreditation.
Yeah, brilliant. Regarding kitchen exhaust fans, can we confirm if kitchen exhaust fans only require reporting and regular checks if they are part of the smoke management system? So I think the important part for this question, if you do go to section 13 under 1851, there is a designated section around kitchen exhaust systems. And with all of 1851 becoming mandatory, it's not just from a fire perspective, it is on the servicing side. I believe that this would all become mandatory.
There's certainly fire safety provisions in the design of a kitchen exhaust system. I think it's more a question for a certifier regarding what content ends up going on the fire safety schedule. Although we do see kitchen exhaust being referenced.
I would say, in support of what Ben said, regardless of whether it is actually on the annual fire safety statement, it is in AS1851, so it would have to be serviced, whether or not it's part of the mechanical smoke handling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a feeling that one's probably in relation to monthly cleaning. So definitely one to look at, and definitely want to be communicating with your clients. I know there's a fair bit of systems out there from a kitchen exhaust perspective that cleaning access is difficult. So again, I think that's an important kind of little segue, is that access to all of these systems, there needs to be clear and early communication with your clients and building operators around access to ensure you can be undertaking all of this service activity in a safe and easily accessible way.
I'm just trying to recall whether a lack of access or inadequate access, exactly which of the defect classifications that fits in. But it's certainly something that should be brought to the attention of the owner, so they've then got the opportunity to fix something that they might not have been aware of.
Absolutely. So I've got one here from Michael Sarkis. How do contractors identify what they are allowed to work on and certify under their license and accreditation? That's probably a good one for yourself, Stacey.
You're on mute, Stace.
That would help too. Sorry, can you read that again for me, Ben?
So how do contractors identify what they are allowed to work on and certify under their licenses and accreditation?
I guess that would be an individual question, because there is a title for every measure that accreditation exists for. So unless there's some confusion as to what's on the annual fire safety statement and what measure it falls under, and then for the different levels of accreditation, we do have practice notes inside the scheme that provides further advice on that. So if you're not sure if your accreditation aligns to the wording on the annual fire safety statement that you're looking to sign off, you can always send a query to fpass@fpaa.com.au, and we're happy to help clarify that.
Perfect. I guess a good time again just to note, we will follow up this webinar one with all the questions that have been asked and try and provide responses as best as possible. We'll also be providing links to the relevant resources for all three of the organisations so that you can do some more reading beyond this point. So moving to a couple of questions on policing and regulations. So again, open to the panel. So who will be policing the non-conformances and non-compliance with scheduling and maintenance of 1851?
Look, we're still seeking direction in that regard. Relatively silent, but we understand the council, and we're in communication with the councils, that the council play a significant role in that. But names and titles of people involved and so forth is still a little bit thin on the ground, but we certainly expect council to play a part in the policing as such of 1851.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of a follow-up to that is, who will issue fines? Council, the Building Commission?
I think that would have to be from council, because as Council and Fire Rescue New South Wales will have the authority to inspect the routine maintenance records. So I can't imagine that as it sits now coming from the Building Commission.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that the biggest one is watch this space. As this starts to become mandatory from next year, there will be, I'm sure, a learning process for governments and councils as well as practitioners and building operators as to how this is enforced. So again, keep up to date with your associations, and as we learn more, we'll provide that information back to you. So a question here from Tristan. So noting the requirements for hard copy records under 1850, is there an expectation to provide records in logbook form per the fire systems provided? So again, at this point in time with the 2012 version, it is hard copies. So you may find that with your building owners, they're also moving to a digital format, but it should be still being provided in that hard copy until things change in the future, which, as mentioned, the New South Wales requirements are still to the 2012 version, which means you will still be provide hard copies moving forward. And so one from Jamie here. What is the accreditation for mechanical engineers? Is C9 accreditation under fair trading adequate?
Is that for the purpose of carrying out maintenance in accordance with AS1851? Is that the focus here?
Don't have any
C9
context.
C9 wouldn't be accepted for the annual fire safety statement checks. But I would say that I think it's Appendix H in AS1851 outlines recommended qualifications and skills and experience for activities under AS1851, breaks it into two skill sets. There's skill set A for the routine bits and pieces, checking fans, adjusting bearings and those sort of things, which is very much set deliberately with the hands-on trade experience. Then skill set B is for carrying out the testing, but also the survey in looking for changes and looking for problems. Now it sets out that can be from trade level with experience up to a relevant diploma or an engineering degree. It doesn't specifically say the C9 accreditation or now engineer mechanical that's available through the New South Wales government. That's a bit of a different role than what we have for AS1851. May find the same people can end up with the same sort of suitable qualifications, but AS1851 doesn't call for that one specifically.
Excellent. So I've got one from Stephen here. If no baseline data is available, is there a method to establish baseline data? If not, what would course of action be to enable certification? So I might jump back to a slide because we did have some information on that we discussed. So just looking at these two slides here. So firstly, the first part would be raising it as a non-conformance. So you can still undertake your annual servicing and testing. Any results recorded, you would record down, but you would just mark it as an unknown, as a pass or fail, given that there's no baseline data. In terms of establishing baseline data, you can engage with your client and either, depending on the nature of the building, engage with a fire engineer and, again, mechanical engineers or the relevant engineers and commissioning sorry, I've lost my word now, your certifier. But ideally what you would be looking at is understanding when the original system was installed so that you can then backdate and test to the relevant standards at the time. If you don't know the exact date of that installation, then you would be looking to commission it or recommission it against the current standards to set a degree of baseline data. Now, again, all of this is to provide a degree of accuracy. It won't necessarily be the best course of action, but that's what you would be looking to do, is to understand when it was installed and, if possible, use the standards at the time to recheck the current performance or commission it back to that performance. I don't know if anyone else wants to elaborate further on that part.
I'd like to add that it's my view that the baseline data is part of the building asset. It's not something that's generated during the maintenance activities, which you're just going through. So working with the building owner to establish what should have been available when the building was handed over, even if it wasn't, even if it's been lost or, you know, it's been managed in a way where it's become lost, that doesn't change the responsibility through the regulation of where that baseline data needed to exist. That might not be the most convenient advice for a building owner, but they need to work to obtain that data. AS1851 has some good guidance on that, where the information's missing and how it needs to be reproduced.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got one from Carl here. How can mechanical service providers comply with the requirements of leaving a hard copy logbook on site at the completion of the test? Such a logbook does not exist and probably cannot be made, as it will be a custom book for each building.
The activities will be the same. There have been a number of logbooks that have been produced over the years. FBA, I know you have them for most of the the wet and dry fire side of things, but I know AMCA used to have logbooks for mechanical services as well, back to earlier versions of AS1851. There'll be standard sort of schedules, but yes, they will be customized for each site. It's detailed activities.
I guess that's just the important part of, as you go to each site, is understanding what's there and using the right resources available to suit that specific job. But again, that doesn't mean you can't be using the direct tables from 1851 and just printing them in a hard copy and providing them to the building owner in a binder situation. Scrolling through the questions here.
Just while you're looking. Oh.
Yep, go ahead, Brett.
I was just going to give you a chance to look through the questions there and just commenting on the availability of baseline data for mechanical services, which we're focusing on very much today. Just the point that AS1668 Part 1 for fire and smoke control related items has required the results of tests for the commissioning to be recorded. It's written in Section 4 since back, at least as far back as 1991. So anything built after that was required to have that, or from that point on, was required to have that, what we now know as baseline data available. The quality of it's obviously improved over time, but just part of that discussion with the building owners about, you know, that detail that's part of their asset and where that information should have existed, just to help building owners come to terms with that detail of their asset.
Yeah, excellent. So I've got a little follow-up to our previous kitchen question. Can you please also confirm a clear yes or no regarding the annual fire safety certificate sign-off? Can the annual fire safety certificate be signed off if there is no maintenance record for 1851?
It's at the determination of every accredited practitioner to determine and justify why they feel that the measure could perform. I would find it hard to believe how you can justify a measure would perform if there's no maintenance activities. But if you believe you have a strong argument why you can say you can, we can't tell you you can't unless that specific situation is investigated and comes up. If for some reason a complaint comes in and we investigate and you have justification, most likely, unless your justification seems ridiculous, it would be an education piece in response to say, we understand you have this justification. We don't agree with it. Here is why. This is what we believe you need to do moving forward. But this is why we can't tell you yes or no. You need to make that determination on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, I would find it hard to believe that you could confirm something performs if it's never been maintained. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect one. Unfortunately, it's not quite something we can provide a yes or no response to. As said, there needs to be the justification of why you think that is the case. So I think that's a good summary there.
I think that also, sorry, Ben, I think this also just highlights the importance of the reforms we've been through that mean only accredited practitioners are making these decisions now. It requires a level of skill and understanding and experience to determine these things. Where in the past, anyone who could claim to be competent in something could make these decisions, and unfortunately, that's left some building owners in a difficult situation.
So a question here from Michael. What is the impact on designers and consultants other than ensuring adequate baseline data are included in the design and referencing AS1851 compliance?
Sorry, can you repeat that one, please, Ben?
Yep. What is the impact on designers and consultants other than ensuring adequate baseline data are included in the design and referencing to AS1851 compliance?
Okay, well, AS1851 is not a design document, but I would say designers have a strong responsibility to make sure the system can be maintained, or they'd be answering to the building owner about what it was that was designed and then delivered if it can't be maintained. So as designers, we need to have a good understanding of what needs to be done to the system after it's handed over.
I think another important aspect there would be, again, just educating your clients as designers and consultants of what these activities will be undertaken by the providers, and making sure that, you know, again, your clients often are the developers and the owners of the asset at the end of the project. So making sure that they're aware of what their obligations are in terms of record keeping and maintaining that. And again, for older buildings that you might have a relationship with, be prepared to hunt down some of that baseline data if you still have those records and they haven't kept them.
And back during the design process, where we face those common challenges in coordination of not being allowed to provide access that's most appropriate, perhaps just have a look at some of the descriptions of defects that will be reported on a mandatory basis after the building's handed over. You don't really want to leave your client in a situation, or the building owner in a situation, where they're getting a defect within first 12 months because the access doesn't actually comply with what's necessary for AS1851.
Again, this might be a good one for yourself, Stacey, from James. Could you clarify the deadlines for transition? An earlier slide mentioned June 25, but also referenced a revised deadline of June 2026.
Yeah, so as I said, as I did mention, half of our practitioners have a deadline of the 31st of July, 2025, but it depends when you gained accreditation, because there was a year you can apply for transitional accreditation. So those who obtained accreditation early on and were accredited by the 31st of July 2020 would need to be qualified by the 31st of July 2025. But if you obtain transitional accreditation to the end of that 1-year period, you would have until the 30th of June 2026.
Yeah, excellent. Question here from Cameron. Is 1851 purely in relation to the maintenance side of equipment? And what courses/training would be relevant for HVAC technicians to do to keep up to date with changes in regulations? So I guess in terms of 1851, it is in relation to not just HVAC systems, but all fire systems. And so it would be important to reference section 13, which talks to the HVAC requirements. In terms of training courses and keeping up to date with regulations, so AMCA and ERA do both offer various forms of training in this space, as well as the FPA, which is probably a little bit more focused towards fire. AMCA does have a registered qualification training with the UEER 98 unit, which is inspect, test and repair smoke systems, as well as further training courses through ERA, which are not necessarily accredited courses, but are good for continuous professional development. Brett, I don't know if there's a particular course you want to talk to there.
Oh, yeah, look, I've been delivering ERA's Essential Safety Measures course for the last, or nearly 10 years now, and it was a course that was in place for about 10 years before that. And it is just a general knowledge course that includes a lot of information on AS1851 and mechanical services. So that's certainly something you can look for on ERA's website.
Again, I think to that point, Cameron, with the follow-up correspondence that we'll end this webinar with, there'll be links to the resources for all three of the organisations in terms of training and development, and contact details for the relevant parties. So if you have more questions on any of those training activities or technical tools, feel free to reach out and we can provide further information there. So another question here from Michael. Is there any requirement for a consultant to report any non-conformance issues if they discover such aspects on a general inspection, which is not directly related to maintenance or service? So I think just as engineers or technicians wanting to improve the industry, I think there's always a degree of onus to be providing that information back to the building owner or your client, regardless of what you found. You might not have the same strict deadlines because you're not necessarily doing the service and have the specific reporting timeframes, but I think there should definitely be an onus set on yourself as engineers or technicians to provide that feedback if you're identifying non-conformances or issues when you're on site.
If something goes wrong, think about the situation you'll be in if you're answering to a coroner about what sort of role you had. You don't want to be caught up just sort of looking the other way, not letting the building owner know, who may not otherwise know about the issue. I think we've just got a bit of an ethical responsibility there to speak up. And we don't have to solve the issue, we just have to raise awareness of it, perhaps encourage the building owner to seek good advice on sorting those things out.
Got a question here from Michael. How does a contractor convince their client to pay for baseline data when the installation standard does not have any mandatory baseline data requirements? For example, AS1851 2.1. So I think in this respect, it's talking to not so much 1851, but specific standards that don't have requirements.
Yeah, so 1851 only requires the baseline data to be relied on when it was part of the approved design. I'm just looking through the text here. Prescribed by regulations, code standards that apply to the approved design. So it's the information limited to that. As I highlighted before, when we're dealing with AS1668, there's been a requirement to record the results of tests since back in 1991. The specific standard that you mentioned there, I'm not as familiar with, but I guess it comes down to what was required at the time. And look, it's an unfortunate situation, and it's an unfortunate reality that that information wasn't always produced in the way that it should, or hasn't been kept and managed properly. That's not the fault of whoever discovers the lack of information.
Another one here states that it's probably relevant from a qualification perspective. Would cross-border people with equivalent qualifications be able to carry out inspections, be accepted?
Yeah. Nothing, there's nothing certainly in fire looking that states are looking to align. I think FPA Australia as a national association would love to advocate for that as much as we can. But that doesn't mean we'll necessarily be successful. So we'll continue to advocate for similar requirements in training and licensing across the country, but it's up to each individual state. At the moment, Queensland's going through something. Victoria doesn't have any requirements except for wet systems. And even New South Wales at the moment, until that new legislation, if it passes, doesn't have a requirement for licensing or accreditation for inspect and test. So at the moment, no, there's nothing going to be aligned nationally, but it's something we can always work towards.
Yeah, definitely watch this space, but good luck getting all the governments of each state to agree.
Therein lies the problem.
All right, we might finish it on this last question here from Pete. So AS1851 2012 states that measures must be inspected by a competent person. Commercial kitchen exhaust hoods now need to be checked monthly. There are thousands of these around the state. Can cafe owners, for example, self-inspect and report, or will they need to engage a qualified company similar to the other fire measures within their businesses, e.g. extinguishers, hose reels? 1.5.5 defines a competent person as a person who has acquired thorough training, qualification, experience. Can you clarify who can perform these tests, i.e. practitioners, owners, filter cleaners?
I think, again, we need to separate the maintenance activities from the system performance testing activities, which it would be for the AFSS. I refer to, I found the reference here, clause H2 in AS1851, the skills associated with routine servicing. That's now, they're only recommendations for mechanical services. Suppose you'd want good reason not to be as closely aligned to that as possible. But as far as the actual testing of the relevant fire safety performance items in a kitchen exhaust system, you'd need an accreditation.
I found it interesting that they compared that example to fire extinguishers, because we get a lot of companies and building owners who actually look to do training so they can test and inspect their own extinguishers. So I suppose if a cafe owner did get appropriate training, they could undertake it, but you would expect them to actually have they need to justify why they believe they're a competent person. You'd expect them to have some sort of training to have undertaken that. And then they also face the issue as to whether or not their accredited practitioner is comfortable endorsing that on the annual fire safety statement when it's the cafe owner saying they've undertaken that work.
I think now, obviously, it needs someone to back me up on this understanding of it, because it's dealing with the actual regulation. But the EP&A regulation in New South Wales puts the responsibility for the maintenance and testing on the building owner, not a tenant within the building. And I've heard of building owners being a little caught out when the tenants haven't been maintaining things in accordance with the owner's responsibilities. Now, it's not a problem for mechanical services side of the industry to solve, but that's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I think definitely agree there. It is on the owners, and I think that's, again, as practitioners in that space, the key here is making sure that you're communicating with your clients and building owners on what their responsibilities are, and to help educate them, because at the end of the day, if we continue to educate them, it's just going to help all parties on all sides, to reduce any surprises, risks, or issues moving forward into the future. All right, we've reached our time there. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you all on the panel for taking the time today to answer these questions. As mentioned, we will follow up this webinar with some further correspondence. If we didn't get to your question today, apologies. However, we will go through and try and provide written responses to all these questions and circulate that as part of the follow-up to this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.